Good morning, Amy. Is it all about the advice monster today?
Yes, we are talking about the advice monster. I'm so excited about this because I know you are a consultant
Mhm.
and I'm a consultant. You consider yourself a coach too?
I do. I facilitate as well. So I constantly have to remind myself the differences between the three, being a coach, being a consultant, being a facilitator, because I
Right.
tend to want to give my advice. So this is a great topic. That's my gut reaction is to give advice, and
Yeah,
not every role needs my advice.
right. Because as consultants, a lot of times we're hired to give advice. People
Mhm.
are asking us for our advice. So stepping away from that sometimes can be
Right.
hard because it's like what we're doing all the time is giving advice. So
Because
anyway,
facilitating is not giving advice. It's facilitating what other people's thoughts are and keeping my advice to myself.
right. And coaching is kind of getting people to come up with their own
Own
advice.
advice. Exactly.
What's going on? So, anyway, this is kind of a fun topic. We're going to talk about taming the advice monster. So, the advice monster is that inclination to give your advice to situations. And we're going to talk a little bit about why we do it and how we do it, and maybe some things to stop us from doing it.
Okay.
All right. So, why do we do it? Why do we give people advice?
Sometimes to fill the dead air space, and because it's the knee-jerk reaction, if especially if we're used to giving advice. And I think we get used to giving advice as we get older too, because it's what's expected of us. So maybe the motive is
Yeah, yeah,
good.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
and I think you're right. I think the motive is good. We're trying to be helpful. We're
Most of the
trying
time.
to most of the time we're thinking, "Oh, I can help. I can help move you forward on this," right? That's kind
Right.
of our the good motive in there.
I think the other thing is, because I was thinking about this, have we become more of an advice warranted, wanted world than we were 30 years ago? But we have those vehicles to get our voice out there. So if your voice is out there, you feel the need to give advice to everyone because that makes your voice more meaningful. But is it needed? Because I felt like if I thought back before social media, before internet, before having a platform or a voice, back in the days when we wrote letters and had just conversations or telephone calls, I got a lot of advice, some warranted, some not. But we have everyone has a platform now. Not everybody had a platform 30 years ago. It was more a one-to-one and not a I'm blasting this out to my 500 friends. I'm
Right.
putting a tweet
I
out. I'm
think
putting a post out.
yeah, and when you're putting stuff out there, people will also ask you for advice as part of that. So it helps build up that confidence in giving advice. And yeah, I remember one time one of my neighbors got a book on organizing for Mother's Day or something like that. It was kind of, I don't recommend giving organizing books as a gift. But
Right.
anyway, that's a whole
That's
different
funny. That's like
conversation.
giving your wife a vacuum cleaner.
Right, right. And I remember her coming to me about a recommendation in the book. And she was like, I'm doing it this way, but they're telling me to do it this way. What should I do? And and this is kind of an advice situation of just because somebody is telling you to do something, if what you're doing is working, and have this self-confidence of embracing what you're doing as being okay, then you don't have to listen to all the advice coming at you.
That's great advice.
Here I am giving advice again. I'm trying not to.
But being comfortable in what you're doing, sometimes
Yeah.
I always go back to an inert object does not move. And sometimes we just need movement and uh, the confidence to do things without gathering too much information too. You got to move. I had somebody once that does coaching, and she's also a business person, and she had a high executive that I would tell you they worked together, so it was more of an informal coaching, but she was coaching, and she said, "I'm so sick of being an asshole." And I said, "An
Oh,
asshole?" And she said, "He always asks for my advice, but he always, 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 and he listens very thoughtfully, but he never acts on it. And I feel like an asshole because I tell him what I think, I offer my advice, but he never does anything." And I've always thought of that, the asshole who just wants to be, it goes a flip side. You can give too much advice, but then you can also give advice and have it not be listened to, and you don't, why would you put yourself out there? You get to a point where it's like, this is leading to nowhere.
right. Right. All right. So I found an article, of course, you know me,
Mhm.
about how this advice monster has three different personas. And I thought this was kind of interesting because the first persona is tell it. We tell it in the loudest of the three. Tell it is the loudest of the three personas. It's convinced you the only way that you can add value is to have all the answers, because if you don't have all the answers, then you fail. I go ahead.
I was going to say this, that being a consultant my whole life, that was good advice. That is good advice to have, because the expectation of always having the answers, it's okay to say, especially when you're asked, "I don't know the answer to that, and as a consultant I'll get back to you." Well, as a human it's the same way. You don't have an answer for everything, and you shouldn't. And quite frankly, listeners, if somebody does, be fearful, because nobody has all the right answers. So it's usually the people that are the bad ask monsters, or I'm sorry, advice monsters, that have something to say about everything. Because if you can't reflect or get input from other people on certain topics that you don't know everything about, it's probably not the best advice. And as a consultant, it was okay to say, "I don't know the answer to that. I might, maybe I have a good feel. I need to research a little." It's okay not to have an answer for everything, and be honest about
I very well stated. I think a lot of it is about being humble about what you don't know.
it. Right.
You can't you can't be an authority on everything. There are some things that you can be an authority on. Like, I consider myself a time management authority. I've studied it, I've practiced it, I've seen lots of people, what their struggles are and how they've solved it. And so if somebody asks me a time management question, I can kind of confidently
Right.
give them advice. Somebody asked me about a sprained ankle, I would not. I
Right.
know nothing medical.
Which is,
And
again, back to the real in things. It's a great way to, it's okay not to know everything, and you shouldn't act as though you do, because chances are you don't. But feel confident in what you feel confident with.
right, right. And part of that's having good boundaries about not feeling like you have to be the solve all. Like especially in a house with a mother. Like sometimes moms feel like for their children, they're the go-to person. So a kid brings a problem, then we're going to give them advice on how to solve it. And that can snowball, that can just not,
Right.
it's not good, because making them solve their own problems, like, there's so many pitfalls to being the solve all person in the house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And being the go-to and be all. So it's, you can
Yeah.
get part of the, you can be part of the advice monster in both ways, the receiver and the giver.
Yeah. 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 So another advice monster persona is the save it. And this is kind of what I was just talking about with
Okay.
moms. I think moms are definitely, or parents, I'm just going to say parents because dads do this too. Um, and this is your only job is to rescue everybody. Don't let anybody stumble, struggle, or have a difficult time. And this is that I'm just here to help. I'm giving you advice so you don't struggle.
I used to say, back when I was working in the hamster wheel and my kids were, oh, junior high, grade school through early high school, That I should just have the Britney Spears microphone, picture the little microphone around, because everything they needed, I was a text or a phone call away. And I took great pride in the fact that I was so resourceful and coming up with ideas and saving them all the time. This is how you should
Yeah.
do, whether it's how to make pasta with just garlic, or I didn't make the baseball team. I was the first call, and I got to tell you, I wore it like a badge. I walked around, I was on call for those kids because I was resourceful, and I was there to, I might not be at home, but I could solve every problem wherever I'm at. And I
Right.
didn't do anybody any favors by doing that.
Yeah. And I'm going to say at home we do it, but I also know managers who do this with their employees. And they they think that they're teaching, they think that they're training, they think like I have one of my clients, I remember talking to him about letting his employees experience some mistakes. Like they're not going to be perfect, and don't prevent them, because we learn from our mistakes. So they're going to have to stumble a little, because that way they'll learn more. And so having that conversation, but I will say, I don't know if I've shared this before, his response was, mistakes cost money, Amy. And so we had the whole, I'm like, all right, well said. So, but we have to balance that. And
Maybe it's not the mistakes, Amy. I tell you, I think it's allowing them to go through the decision-making process, because part of my Britney Spears microphone visual is back to, you bring up employees. I can hear them talking and brainstorming. And one thing I'm really good at is coming up with a good solution. It's part of my strengths. And I do that with my kids, back to resourceful, finding solutions, having a pretty good feel for what's going to work, what's not going to work, and make a decision on going with something. Well, it's easy to piggyback on me in the workplace too, to say, okay, she's going to take the chance, because it's easier to let somebody else take the chance. And what I found is, maybe it's not allowing them to fail, but allow them to process the steps to come, and then guiding them to what I think is the right solution, but letting them have the decision-making processes to get there. Like, I'll use the easy example. Child calls and says, I want to make pasta. How do I add the garlic? Rather than saying, boom, 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 1, 2, 3, get the garlic out the press, you do this, do that. Maybe here's the video, I'll text it to you, watch the YouTube video. How do you think it's going to work? What are your thoughts on that? And I've learned with age that approach, so maybe he's not going to set fire to the kitchen. I'm not going to allow that to happen, but let him do some decision making on his own. So when does advice become, the advice monster can be telling what to do without allowing a person to go through the decision making on their own, so they can not be an inert object the next time.
right, right. And they learn from going through the process.
Right.
So this brings me to when my kids were little, like I'm a huge fan of natural consequences. And when my oldest, Reagan, when she turned 6 months, she was crawling,
Mhm.
which is really young to be moving. Like she didn't have the wherewithal to understand the dangers.
Right.
So one of the things that I did right off the bat was I put a gate up on our stairs so she couldn't go upstairs. And because I just wanted to eliminate the hazard, right?
Right.
Well, soon after I read, we need to let the children experience the stairs, because then they learn that they fall, and then they learn not to go on them again. And so they said, move the gate up 3 steps, just so that they crawl and they fall. And you put a nice rug at the bottom so they're not hurt when they fall. And that was a complete switch to my mindset as a mom, because I was like, I need to protect, I need to save, I don't want her to experience the stumble. And this kind of, if she were old enough for me to give advice, I would have said, stay away from the stairs, but I put the gate up. But letting her fall changed her whole attitude towards stairs. She never ran towards stairs. She knew if she went on the stairs, she would fall and hurt herself. So
How hard is that as
as
a parent to let them fall? It's so easier. We can sit here and talk about it all day long, but it's hard.
It's
especially if we
hard.
know a solution, like I'm going to put this barrier up and baby won't fall. I'm going to,
Right.
I'm going to schmooze the coach of the select team and the parents and make sure my kid makes the team because I don't want him to fail. I'm going to get him to try out for the team that he has the most likelihood of making the team so he doesn't fail. That's much easier than just letting them pick the team and failing or succeeding.
Right. We're succeeding. Right.
We're succeeding.
Right. It's hard. I'm going to say it's hard as a parent. All right. So let's talk about the third persona. The third persona is the sneakiest of the three. It said
Mm.
it's called control it. Control
Oh,
it. No, control it has convinced you the only way you win is to maintain control at all times. If anybody else takes over control, even just a little bit, then you and them and they will definitely fail. So, isn't this an interesting one?
wow. Beep, 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 beep. You know, again, we had the episode about being called bossy. I think I hear controlling. You have to be in control. And I would argue that, and this kind of goes with the bossy. I don't feel like I have to be in control of everything. Most things I don't care about, but if I care about them, that's when this one hits. You know, back to the advice that I'm trying to control a situation. And when I've taken control, I don't like to give it up. And I'll give advice in a
Yeah.
sneaky way. I don't think my motives are impure, but when I take control of something, it's a problem. And I like the word sneaky because control is a sneaky thing, especially if you don't want to lose it. Because then
Yeah.
is your motive really that pure?
Right. And a lot of times we don't identify it as trying to control the situation. We're just trying to help them. We're trying to protect them. We're trying to prevent this horrible possible outcome. So it's not, we don't see it as controlling, but it could be perceived as controlling.
Think about the flip of that, Amy. If I'm going to put myself in somebody else's shoes or the other person's shoes, by me controlling means they don't have control. If somebody
Right.
doesn't have control, are they ever going to buy in to the situation? Are they ever going to own it as their own? I don't think there's anything good that can come out of one person being in full control and another person not being in control. And maybe that's a good strategy for this one is when you feel like you're doing the right thing by taking control. It's one thing if they're drowning in a lake. I mean, truly, they have no control and you're taking control to save them. It's a whole other problem if they're drowning in the lake because you've kind of pushed them. You know, I mean, the visual would be if I'm taking control, I could be pushing them to that because they have no choice in the matter. I'm driving it.
Right.
I think of when
Right.
Grant, oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say the flip side, sometimes people want us to take control.
Oh, yeah.
Like they can't make a decision and they don't want to be responsible for the decision. So they ask for our advice so that we are now in control, and then they get to play the person who's not in control.
Which is neither one is a good circumstance, but they happen a lot.
Right.
That falls in that whole ask hole theory. That's really
Yeah.
what's happening there is take control of this, you know, take control of it for me. I think of the example I gave this. I talked about this in one of other podcasts, and I don't remember in what context. I think it was about allowing to fail. Maybe it wasn't being bossy. Gosh, I'm falling in a lot of bad categories right now. But I talked about how when Grant was in Durango and he was moving and he needed to move, you know, there was a breakup with a girlfriend. He wanted to move. And I did the motherly thing and took control of the situation. I was making phone calls. I was finding him a place to live, a job. I mean, just kind of getting him out the door. And he had his own plan. He wanted to do something different. And I didn't feel like, I think I pictured him drowning in the lake. And I just kept pushing my agenda. And good for him, he said, no, this is what I'm going to do. And actually, mine would have, I won't go through the whole story. Mine would have fallen through. And his ended up being, he it ended up being good because he owned it. He wanted it. He wanted to make it work. It was a stepping stone, not long term, but he knew he just wanted a stepping stone for a little bit. And,
Yeah.
between that and COVID and everything else, his was the right decision. But more importantly, it was his and he owned it. He was in control and he needed that. But I really had to be, sometimes I'll say for me, and I know this is for a lot of other people too, a 2x4 is much more powerful for me than a little ruler. And sometimes it takes a 2x4 for me to stop pushing for control or thinking I've got the right intent. And I think he basically had to use a 2x4 and say, I'm not doing it. And he was right.
Okay, so Sandy, I love the visualization of the 2x4. I'm going through something similar with my one of my girls, and she's looking for a job, and I keep sending her. I mean, I am on LinkedIn searching for jobs for her because I'm like trying to, and I'm like, and it's only when I have spare time. It's not all the time, but it's like she's told me, Mom, take a step back. I got this. And so but I feel like and like we read Chasing the Bright Side, and I
Right.
was like, I've got to give this to her because I want, like, I have these big hopes and dreams, and I'm like, and she wants her own path. And so I'm having to control my instincts.
And control isn't always so bad because when I see your face and you talk about this, I mean, we see the great in our kids, right? And using as a great
Yeah,
example. So like my intent with Grant wasn't because, gee, I saw this bright side for him from my experience and my hopes and dreams that I was trying to exert with him. So sometimes we see things in them that we want to push them so that they can do those things, but there's a fine line between being the advice monster or the control monster, the sneaky number three,
right.
the sneaky
Right,
number
right,
three
right,
of
right.
doing, of sending the LinkedIn jobs on the side.
I know. I'm like, I have got to stop. So anyway,
Amy, one thing that's really funny is think back, just really quick. When I was that age, I don't think, other than my parents saying, what's new, there was no sneaky advice monster. We were on our own, right?
for the most part, there was I remember some philosophical types of
What
discussions, but
college to
not,
go to, but I'm thinking different ones too, but it wasn't my every move. There were certain
no,
things, it
oh
wasn't my
gosh,
every move.
no, completely hands off. So let's go on to some questions.
Okay.
And one of the things this advice monster, how to cure it, was start to ask questions out of curiosity. So let's talk about some of these questions. The first question, and you kind of touched on this in the beginning, was shifting the conversation instead of giving them the answers, asking some questions to dig a little deeper. And one of them is asking, what is the real challenge here for you? So that when somebody's asking for advice, and this kind of took me back to our book discussion, thanks for the feedback,
Mhm.
because that was one of the things that was brought up in the book was, what exactly are they looking for? Like, what kind of conversation is this? Is this a coaching conversation? Is this a, you want my advice, or you just want a shoulder to lean on? Like, what are
Right,
you looking for here?
right.
Okay. So, what's the real challenge here for you? The second question is, what else? The third question is, what do you want?
I like that.
That's what I thought too, because if somebody comes to you, or even if you're inclined, so even me thinking through my situation with Taylor looking for a job and me wanting to guide her, I should be asking myself, what is the real challenge for her? She doesn't, she's not in a spot where she thinks it's a challenge right now. She's good. So
Right.
I'm creating in my head. And then what does she want?
I think just this very simple, not remedy, but when before giving advice at any time, whether um, back to somebody asked for advice over and over and over again versus control, the sneaky monster of trying to give advice on the side to push a control issue. is asking questions, seeking to understand. It's such a simple strategy to kind of take, maybe it puts a pause in it before the advice is given to say, is it wanted? And pushing the person to try to get to their own. It's meeting in the middle of giving advice and becoming a monster to bringing out, helping them come to their own decision, or finding out that they really don't want your advice. You know, part of advice or giving good advice is having the recipient want to have it, right?
Right. Right. So asking the questions puts us in two articles I read. Asking the questions puts us in the mode of I'm considering what you want. I'm asking the questions because I love you, I respect you, I am honoring you. And one of the one of the poems that I was referring to at the beginning was it's called The Advice Epidemic. But one phrase in it was, each time we advise someone, it may feel like it's arising from a place of love, but it's actually the ego saying, I know what's best for you,
Wow.
which is so true. It's like, I read that and I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. So, yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, so another question is really quick. Have you ever gone against mainstream advice?
I think I do that a lot, actually. I'm trying to
Do
think of,
you?
do you have an example? Do you go against mainstream advice?
I don't do it a lot, but I do. There have been some times that I have, and it's typically around letting my kids suffer natural consequences. Like, someone will tell me the gate needs to be at the bottom of the stairs. And I'm like, well, no, I think I didn't come to that conclusion myself, but I experienced that. So I learned that. I remember the kids when they were in grade school, the school saying, your kids need to come to school with hats, gloves, coats, or we're not going to let them go out for recess. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go against that advice and I'm going to let them decide what they're wearing to school. And then the natural consequences, they have to stay inside if they're not dressed appropriately. So that's when I think about, yes, I've gone against some advice, and the school teachers always sent me little notes and I'm like, you know what? They'll figure it out.
You know, I
So,
think my biggest one with natural advice is when I was not even divorced, like it went on for a year. And the advice I continued to get was uh, don't date for 3 years, get your life in order first. And then what do I do? Not only do I start dating right away, I date somebody who lives 550 miles away in Denver. I mean, I went non-conventional against every bit of advice that I got when, and look where I'm at. You know, it was the
yeah.
best bucking against non-conventional advice that I ever, because I went with my gut and I knew that how things, conventional advice goes with what people know from the outside. And sometimes back to like your kids, whether it's wearing mittens, for me, it was the naturalness of the relationship and where it was going. And I knew I made those choices on my own. So
Yeah. So that ties to, I have this quote right here. It says, if I am not trying to be better, it doesn't mean I'm getting worse. I can be good where I am. And I
oh,
thought that
that's
was
great.
so self-accepting and like, we don't need other people's advice. A lot of stuff that we want, it's inside us. The solutions are inside us. Sometimes we need people to prompt us to give us some ideas, but the solutions are there.
Follow your gut and you're going to be right about 95% of the time. It's just how you
Right.
follow
All right. So real quick, what's the real in these situations and what's the ideal?
it. Well, the real is we're human and we're always, advice is always going to be out there, warranted, unwarranted, either us, the recipient, the one giving it. It's a reality. Unless you live a solo existence, which is almost impossible, it's something you have to work with. And I'd say the ideal is I love the taking, asking questions, being curious, and never jumping to either receiving or giving advice without pushing some natural curiosity to really flush out a better answer or more appropriate. And sometimes that might mean no answer, that the person either
Yeah.
works it out on their own or you don't need to give the advice.
Yeah. I think those are great. I think always and both the real and the ideal, keeping an eye on your ego and what's
Yes.
if your ego is driving the advice or yeah, what it is that's driving you to give that advice. All right. So I had a wrap question here, but I'm going to change it. I
Okay.
hope you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
The wrap question, we only have 1 minute.
Okay.
So who are you rooting for in the Super Bowl?
Here, I'm going to say this really fast. I'm writing a blog on this. When Tom Brady asked, people love to hate Tom Brady, but when he asked the security guard, can I say hi to my son? I'm like,
Oh,
and it was his son that was through a girlfriend and how he's a dad. So I really do like both quarterbacks. Gosh, I don't know. I'm going to be happy whoever wins. Okay, I'm done.
okay. Well, I'm rooting for the Chiefs. I'm just gonna say it.
I'll be
I'm
happy
so
with
excited.
either one. How about that? And I'm really excited for the game. So I hope it's a good
Yeah,
game,
me too.
but I'm not a Tom
Yeah.
Brady hater. I'm just not. I'm sorry. I told my son, I said,
You know what?
he's an older dork. And my son said he is an older dork. And I'm like, and I like older dorks. And I love it that he's still good. But I love Patrick Mahomes too. And I love the Chiefs. And I love Shaq Barrett on the Tampa Bay. He's from Boys Town. Did you know that?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Tampa
Oh,
Bay,
that's really
yeah. He's from Boys
cool.
Town. He's married to
So
a college friend's daughter. Yeah.
nice. So I am not a Tom Brady hater, but I will tell you, being on the opposite side of Tom Brady for many years as a Chiefs fan, um, it's very frustrating because he always pulls it out. Like, and so it's not that I don't like him, he just really frustrates me because he can just make magic happen.
And
And when
I
you're on the
love his
opposite team, oh
I love his level of ego because it isn't ego, it's talent and competitiveness, but he is a dork and he is older and
yeah,
I don't know. So, I'm the
right.
X's and O's from the outside. So,
Yeah. Well, I love old dorky people too. Count me in. All right. Thanks, Sandy.
on
We'll
that
talk to you
note,
later.
go Chiefs.